This might be controversial, but it's really not about politics. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. The election has happened. As of filming this, we have a decision about the next president of the United States. Some people are happy about it, some people are not happy about it. People voted, the decision was made. I've mentioned this in other videos, but you know, if you are having feelings about the election, honor them, but please channel them in a healthy way so you're not harming yourself or others. But I, was watching a lot of the podcasts and a lot of the media surrounding the election. I keep my channel relatively politically neutral. I do have videos talking about the masculine feminine energies in politics. It's not one of my more popular videos, but I'm very proud of it, so I will link that to this one if you want to check that out. I also have a video talking about dating in like a, this kind of controversial political climate, if you want to check that out as well. So I want to make this video, but this is actually not about politics at all. It's really not about any kind of policies or anything like that. This is literally just about relationships and energetics. And I wanted to focus on the relationship between our future Vice President, JD Vance, and his wife, the future Second Lady, Usha Vance. Because I actually think they're kind of an interesting couple. And I wanted to talk about them a little bit in more of a relationship dynamic, energetic way. So this is not about politics, it's not about policy, it's not about anything like that. So I'm not here to get into some kind of political discussion with anybody. This just isn't about that. So before I get into this, my usual disclaimer, I don't know any of these people personally. I am solely making judgments on their relationships based on the public information that we all have in front of us. I'm analyzing their, their energetics and interactions, things they say, and just really analyzing it. It's really not even about the people I'm talking about. This is actually really more about what we can learn from, their public image, their public persona that we can take into our own lives so we can have happier, healthier lives and relationships. We might find out that, any of the people I talk about in any of these videos have a completely separate life and their life could be completely different behind closed doors. I don't know. It's not about them. It's actually about using their public image and what we can learn from that to take it into our own lives. And I watched several of the podcast interviews that JD Vance did. I have not read his book. I know he has a book kind of about his life and his past. Apparently he has a pretty interesting life and past, and they also made a movie about it for Netflix. I didn't see the movie. I actually let my Netflix subscription expire because I wasn't really using it, and I think that's the only place you can watch it as of right now. So I have not seen that. So I just know like briefly his backstory. I haven't actually read the book or seen the movie. So one of the interesting things about Usha Vance is that she is quite an accomplished woman herself. Her and JD Vance actually met when they were Yale law students. She's a Yale law graduate. She worked as a lawyer. She's had a lot of high profile positions, and she's a quite accomplished woman and quite intelligent herself. That actually does bring up an interesting topic that I want to get into. JD Vance comes from very modest beginnings, but he was a senator. He is now the vice president. I don't think that there's anybody that could argue that he isn't, I'm assuming he makes pretty good money. I don't know what his income is now, but he has a lot of power and influence now. So I think he could qualify in our society based on essentially, the standards that we hold for high value men. I don't love that term, but like the standard that sort of the alpha male bros or something would call a high value man. Like he fits that. He's got money, status, power, height, love him or hate him, he qualifies. I also would notice that another prominent member of the election, somebody who was running for president and then was very active in the election, was Vivek Ramaswamy. He is also a very successful businessman, has a lot of money. I'm pretty sure, I don't remember the exact numbers, but he actually invested his own money in his own presidential campaign, lost a significant amount of money, and it was like nothing to him. So he's obviously doing quite well financially. And he's married to a woman who is apparently a very successful doctor. And it's actually really interesting. I'm not going to get into them and their relationship too much. I highly recommend that you check out Vivek Ramaswamy's interview on the Flagrant podcast, because he has a story about his wife basically having to choose her career during COVID and him having to stay home with their infant and how they navigated that. And it's actually kind of a really fascinating story about like two people who have like a really strong purpose in life, figuring out how to navigate that in times of stress, but also as a couple and as new parents. I thought that was really interesting. And politics aside, I thought that was really interesting. Both of these men are, you know, they have what we would as society consider high value, as in having a lot of, you know, money and power and status in life. And these men are not married to these sort of like super young, super uneducated, super dumb, like naive women. They're married to very strong, educated women who are close in age to them, you know, are very strong and powerful and intelligent on their own. And I think that's a really important message that we need to, we need people to understand, because unfortunately there's a lot of podcast bros who have microphones who, some of them are somewhat financially successful, but a lot of them are sort of new money, or they're, you know, they've made a lot of money in sort of like flash or entertainment or things like that. And they have this message that like all these like quote unquote high value men are just looking for some like young girl they can pick up off the streets, and she just has to be young and pretty, and she shouldn't be educated, and she should be really naive. For most men that are looking for success and power and looking for some kind of influence in life, they're gonna want to partner with a woman who actually knows how to carry herself in a room full of, you know, other powerful, successful, intellectual people. You don't see a lot of truly what I would call like actual men of status, money, and power in society just going out and like finding some girl that works behind the counter at McDonald's and then just like rescuing her and taking her off to his family and being like, this is gonna be my bride. Sometimes that happens in like their midlife crisis years, which will bring me to another topic I'll talk about in a second. But most of these guys that are actually looking to really work their way up to being of status, influence, power in society are gonna want a woman of class, status, education, something in their society. The average man who is high value is not just out there looking for some girl who is just looks and no substance. He's gonna need a woman who's actually gonna be able to like walk into a room and be able to interact with other men that have intelligence. Now, I don't necessarily mean that means that you have to be like a Yale graduate or something like that. I stand by the fact that some of the most educated people that I've met, like as far as educated on paper, are not always the smartest people I've met. I've known a lot of really smart people that don't actually even have a college degree. But I think there's this false message out there that men of some kind of status or quality or something are just gonna want some shallow, superficial woman that they can just sort of manipulate, and that's not really the way it really plays out when we're talking about actual men with like money, status, success, influence, power in society. Generally speaking, they're gonna want a woman who knows how to carry herself. And that might be a very educated woman, that might be a woman who actually, you know, has her own career and purpose, or that might be a woman who, you know, just knows how to carry herself in a room full of, you know, other influential status people. So I don't want women to start listening to any of these podcasts, guys. I could just stop that statement there. But like, I don't want women to start listening to these guys and be like, okay, just work on your looks and don't work on your brain. Don't work on your, you know, anything else. Just meet a guy that will take like a Cinderella who is just off the streets and will just sort of make her into a, you know, a princess or something. Like, that's not really the way that it works. Like, as a woman, most men that have anything going for them are going to want to partner with a woman that has something going for her. And that doesn't mean you have to be like a hardcore career woman. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Some men are going to want a woman who prioritizes family more. But, you know, if you're a man who is, you know, educated, if you're a man that has, you know, some kind of status or power in society, and you're gonna have kids with a woman, even if your wife is gonna stay home and take care of kids, and your kids are spending the majority of their time with their mother, they're not gonna want some idiot helping his kids with, you know, their homework and stuff. They're gonna want the mother of their kids to be a woman that has a brain, you know what I mean? So this idea that women have to be sort of just like, you know, brainless trophies for men, it's not really that accurate the way it plays out in real life. In fact, and I know talking about Trump is super controversial, for those of you that are old enough to know, I feel like young people may not understand this, but like Donald Trump was a very, very prominent figure in pop culture for many, many, many years. It was kind of love him or hate him, but he was not that controversial up until he started running for president. Again, this is politics aside. I know he's a very polarizing figure as far as politics goes. I actually did read his daughter Ivanka Trump's book, The Trump Card, which I don't even know if it's in print now. It's an older book. It was actually from before she was even married. I really liked the book, to be honest with you. It's not a feminine energy book, but I did think it was really interesting to learn about business from a woman's perspective. So if you are a businesswoman or something, I actually think it's a really interesting read. And it did give a little bit of insight into what her life was like growing up as a Trump. It talked about her mother and also it wasn't so much about the Melania years, because I think that was still relatively new at the time, but a little bit about the Marla Maples years. And Ivana Trump was not just some trophy wife. Ivana Trump was a very strong, intelligent woman. I don't think she was highly educated, but Ivana Trump was pretty impressive. And she was married to Donald Trump for many, many years. She wrote a whole book. I haven't read her book. I probably should. I think it was actually called like Don't Get Mad, Get Everything, all about like getting revenge on him and stuff. And they actually even remained friends for years. So, you know, she kind of was sort of led the path of women kind of getting revenge through divorce and things like that. And Donald Trump did cheat on her. It was public information. He cheated on her with Marla Maples, then he married Marla Maples. I also did read a Cosmo article. This was so many years ago when I used to read Cosmo. I was so young and I was way too young to be reading this article about how Marla Maples like targeted Donald Trump while he was married and had this whole strategy of like learning his schedule and learning about him and studying him. And it was kind of a fascinating read about how she targeted him. Now, the fact that he had an affair, I always blame the person in the relationship who cheats for the affair, whether she targeted him or not. Separate issue. I think everybody pretty much acknowledges, okay, Donald Trump had an affair, he cheated on Ivana, Ivana divorced him, he ended up marrying Marla Maples. One of the things that I took from reading Ivanka's book, she doesn't say this like outright, but it's heavily implied. Marla Maples was kind of Donald Trump's like midlife crisis, and she was much more flaky. She's not really all that intelligent. I'm not making this to bash her, but she wasn't really responsible. She was, you know, flaky and not really, she was never on time and things like that. And that basically like Trump really could not handle that. And that's not that uncommon why there would be an attraction there, because he is somebody who is very focused and he's, I mean, I'm sure that people could debate whether or not he's in healthy or wounded masculine energy, but he is a very masculine man at his core in the sense that he is very disciplined. He has a lot of direction. He's a very serious purpose. It makes sense why he would be attracted to a woman who was a little bit more flowy, flighty, feminine, because that would be difference. However, one of the issues apparently that used to come up in their marriage was that she couldn't be on time. She was always making him late, and he is not into being late. When the feminine in a woman is so chaotic that it starts to inhibit the masculine's purpose, the masculine's not gonna be able to handle that. So as much as having that difference in a relationship is good in that polarity, the masculine will always prioritize purpose over everything. So if the masculine feels like the feminine is inhibiting his purpose, he won't be able to handle that. Love or hate Donald Trump, you can't argue that he doesn't have value as far as our society goes, as far as having money, as far as having status, power, fame, all these kind of things that we think of as having value. Love him or hate him, he has them. The fact that he was with Ivana for a very long time. She was a very strong, powerful woman. She was very involved in a lot of his companies. And then he ends up having the affair with Marla Maples, probably because he was drawn to her kind of flighty feminine, so to speak. But he couldn't maintain that in a relationship because it took him away from his purpose. It was too unruly and it was too wild and too chaotic, and he couldn't deal with that. She was kind of like just the sexy, pretty face, and there wasn't more to that. Then he ends up with Melania, and personally I think Melania is, we don't know a ton about her. I might read her book at some point, but she seems much more subdued. She's somebody who wants to be more private. She speaks several languages. I don't think she's a dummy by any means. She's not necessarily like an intellectual, so to speak, as far as I know, but I don't believe that she's like a dumb person, but she does seem like she carries herself in a very regal way. You can say a lot of bad things about Trump if you want to, but I think Melania comes across like a very classy woman. Again, I think that was the realization that like somebody who was sort of a very flighty feminine just doesn't pair well with a man that has a very distinct purpose, because that's going to inhibit his purpose, and the masculine is always going to prioritize his purpose. So, and again, you could argue whether or not Trump is healthy masculine or unhealthy masculine, but it just goes to the point that I don't think that women need to be super rigid and structured, and you don't need to have like a super high education. You don't have to be a super, you know, a focus-driven career woman if you don't want to. Like, everyone's gonna have their own priorities. But I think this idea that men in these positions of status want just a trophy on their arm that doesn't have a brain and can't think for herself and, you know, is sort of very easily manipulated or more flighty or things like that. Like, that's not really the way it plays out, because if she's too unstable, he might be attracted to that because men are often attracted to the instability, but if it starts to inhibit his purpose, it's going to be a problem. I was not trying to get into a whole analysis of Trump because I know that he's very polarizing, and I want to get back to the JD Usha situation, but again, that was just an observation that I had of, you know, you've got a lot of men who, love him or hate him, these are men that have a lot of power and status in society, and they're not men who are just with brain dead women they just found off the streets and stuff. They tend to be with women that have an education, that know how to carry themselves well in society, and are actually in support of the man's higher purpose, and not women who are going to use a lot of their unhealed issues or their flightiness or their wounded feminine or something to like take away from his purpose. That could dive into a whole conversation about sexual polarity that I'm not going to get into in this video. I have other videos about that. I could do a video talking about Melania. I could look into her more if you guys are interested in that, but that's a whole other subject. Anyway, so a few things I noticed in the interviews with JD Vance. I watched his interviews with Theo Vaughn, which I thought was very entertaining. I watched his Rogan interview, which I thought was engaging. You know, love him or hate him, I thought they were very interesting interviews. First of all, I've seen people point out that the way that Usha looks at JD, she looks at him with so much admiration. I know there's a lot of back and forth about kind of like the black cat golden retriever and the attitude that like the man should be looking at the woman with admiration and things like that, and women being more detached. Usha's not, she's not an idiot, right? Like she's a pretty strong woman. She's very educated, and I don't know, she has a lightness about her, and I feel like women who are in bad relationships don't have that lightness about them. I haven't seen as much footage of JD looking at his wife, which might just be because I just haven't seen clips of that, but I have seen clips of Usha looking at JD, and she glows when she looks at him. In some cases, can be a sign of a woman being more into a man than he is into her. In some cases, I don't think that's the case, and I'm gonna get into that in a minute, but she really glows when she looks at him. I always say women glow when they're loved properly. So I think that's a sign that they've got something good going on. And I've heard people say this, and I have to say, it does really play out in what I've observed in life, is that you can always tell how good a man is by how good his wife looks. Like if a woman looks like healthy, happy, well taken care of, like she looks like she's glowing, you typically have a pretty good man on your hands. If a woman looks like she's like running ragged, she's tired, she's stressed, it's a reflection of the man, because women glow when they're loved properly, and it never fails. So when women like let themselves go, so to speak, it's usually a sign that the husband's not stepping up. It's usually a sign that she's not in a good relationship, and I always put that on the man. I know guys don't like that, but guys want to be the leaders of their relationships, but yet they don't want to take the accountability for the fact that it's their leadership and it's how they show up that sets the whole tone for the relationship. So the fact that Usha seems to be glowing through this whole process, I think is a sign that they probably have a pretty good relationship. Don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but I think it's a good sign. I've also noticed that in all the interviews that I've seen, and again, I've mostly watched like the longer podcast interviews, they weren't really necessarily about JD and Usha's marriage specifically, but anytime he did mention her, it was always in such a positive and respectful way. He's a politician, so they tend to be trained to, you know, answer questions in a certain way. But it does seem like there's an admiration. I have heard, it wasn't in the interviews I watched, but I have heard JD say things that like his wife keeps him humble, because anytime he gets too like full of himself, he reminds himself that his wife is smarter than him, which I think is kind of cute. I think it was the Theo Vaughn interview where Theo mentioned a woman, I think it was a female golfer or something, and JD just went, you know, I only have eyes for one woman and that's my wife, or something along those lines. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, how easy was that? Like how easy was it for a man to say that? Like how easy was it for a guy to not be talking about how attractive another woman other than his wife was? You know what I mean? And like that really did impress me, because I think more guys need to do that, especially guys who are married and in relationships. Like how easy was it for him to just say, I only have eyes for my wife? So simple, so easy. I also do really love the fact that it seems like JD always talks about being around his kids, doing things with his kids. You know, he grew up without a dad. He grew up in a very complicated situation. His mom notoriously had a drug problem, and he was raised by his grandmother. And he does seem like he very much prioritizes time with the kids. And I do think that's a really good message. Love or hate him as a politician, you know, he is in a very, you know, he's a senator. He's in a position of power and influence in society, even campaigning, which is a lot. Being vice president is going to be a lot and stuff. And it does really seem like he prioritizes being a dad and being involved in his family's life, which I think is a really great message for men in general, because I think there's a lot of men who think that, like, well, as long as they're going out and making some money, that's all that matters, and actually being an active participant in the family isn't as important. And it does seem like that's something that JD prioritizes, which I think is great. He's actually talked about cooking with his kids, with his sons for one thing, which I think is also a really great message to be, you know, like not having it be like, okay, the daughter's the one in the kitchen cooking, although I think their daughter's the youngest, so I think she's a little bit too little to be cooking at this point. But he was telling a story on one of the podcasts about cooking in the kitchen with one of his boys and stuff. So I just think that's a good message to be sending, like, boys can be in the kitchen too. Like, I mean, I just think that him participating in family life is a good message for people, because I think there's a lot of men that don't prioritize participating in family. And then they whine about why fathers aren't seen as important, or why fathers aren't prioritized as much in divorce court and things like that, when it's like, well, you weren't there. Like, you weren't an active participant in the family. And I think having somebody who very publicly and very openly is an active participant as a father in his kid's life, I think is a really great message. Again, love or hate the politics, but I think that's a really great message for the country, for the society, for, you know, our culture. Particularly for someone who grew up without a father, to actually be stepping up and trying to be the father that he didn't have. I think that's a really great message for, you know, the next generation of men. I also think it's interesting. I've seen a few interviews with Usha where she talks about meeting JD at Yale Law School, and they had a lot of classes together. And it's funny how she always talks about, like, oh, we were just friends. We were just friends, and we got to know each other, and, you know, we were friends first for a while, and we spent time together and got to know each other and everything. Whereas I'm pretty sure it was Theo Vaughn's podcast, I don't remember, but in one of the interviews that JD did, he said, oh, I met my wife, and I was immediately like, I want to marry her. I actually really like that dynamic. I think that's actually probably the way that it works best. I do often find that these guys that think that they know right away, sometimes that's a man picking a woman for the wrong reasons. Not every case, I'm not saying that's happening here, but I do think that can be sometimes. But the fact that he was so, like, gung-ho, like, I'm all about this from the beginning, and the fact that she took her time, got to know him, she's like, we were just friends. Like, for her, it was a little bit more of a slow burn. I think that's a good sign. I think when women get to, he's the one, that's it, too quickly, it's usually a bad sign, because oftentimes she's picking a man from, like, past trauma, or, you know, like some kind of a trauma bond situation, and oftentimes that tends to not really work out. The woman ends up very susceptible to love bombing and things like that. And the fact that she was like, took her time, got to know him, got to see what kind of a man he was, but he was like, I was all in from the beginning. So, like, he was the one pursuing her. He's mentioned a few times in interviews how he was trying to impress her. He, like, went out of his way to try to cook, you know, like, vegetarian food for her. He told a story, I think it was on Rogan, about, like, attempting to cook her a vegetarian meal because she's Indian and he really wanted to impress her, and how poorly it went. Now, I want to make a note about that, because when a guy's really into a woman, especially when they were younger, I mean, they were in law school together and stuff, when a guy's really into a woman, he doesn't always do everything right. And I want to make a distinction between a man trying and making an effort and then, like, learning from the mistake and then trying to do better. That's different than weaponized incompetence. Weaponized incompetence is when a man literally just continues to do something poorly so that he doesn't have to do it, so the woman will just step in and be like, let me just take care of it because you're doing it wrong. People are human, they make mistakes. So he talked about, like, trying to make her a vegetarian meal and it coming out horrible. But he made the effort, and it sounds like, at least, I don't know this for sure, but it sounds like he was like, okay, that didn't work, and he kept trying to impress her by trying to get better. That's a good sign. And it's not about expecting a man to be perfect and do everything perfectly, because sometimes when guys are, like, really into a woman and they're trying really hard to impress her, sometimes things don't always go the right way. And that's okay, because we're all human, none of us are perfect. That's different than a man who keeps intentionally doing things poorly just so he doesn't have to do them anymore. That's weaponized incompetence. Now, in the very beginning, you may not know, which is, again, why it's important for women to take their time and get to know a guy before just jumping in, because you don't always know what you're dealing with in the very beginning. But it's really not about a guy doing everything perfect and knowing how to do everything perfectly right away, but it's about him wanting to make the effort, him wanting to pursue you, him wanting to actively show you that he cares, show you that he's trying, improving. If he makes a mistake, learning from the mistake. Again, when I say mistake, I mean like he attempts to make you a dinner and it may not go perfectly. Not like a mistake like, oops, I slept with your sister. Like, not like that kind of mistake, but like make a mistake in, you know, maybe he picks a restaurant that's not ideal, but like he was trying because he thought it'd be something you'd like, you know what I mean? Like, not necessarily expecting a guy to do everything perfectly, but knowing that he's trying and him like learning from a mistake and then doing better next time, as opposed to a guy who just like keeps screwing up. Oftentimes the guy who keeps screwing up either doesn't care enough to do better, or he's intentionally doing bad, so like you'll lower your expectations or you'll do stuff for him or something like that. I want to make that distinction. I would also point out that I do find it very interesting that as much as JD grew up, he was raised by his grandmother, he didn't really have a relationship with his father and things like that. He ended up going to the military, which I know people are very conflicted about the military, but I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos and stuff, that in order for men to step into their masculine energy, they need to be initiated. And there needs to be an initiation process. And if you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend you look into the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. It breaks this down like perfectly. I would also say the movie 300 actually kind of sums this up perfectly, and like the way that they kind of like turn boys into men. Men who go into military training, I'm not saying all men in the military are great guys. I'm not saying that it automatically works for everybody, but learning that discipline structure, like having that, you know, community of men kind of like step in and train you and force you to step up, and you have to learn things like discipline. I'm not saying that the military is always the answer and that military is always the right answer, but I am saying that the fact that we don't have initiation processes for men to step into their masculine, to go from boys to men in our society right now, is a huge problem. And I just wanted to point out that the fact that you have someone who seems to be stepping into the role of, you know, a good father, a good husband, at least on the surface, it seems like that, and has actually overcome so much. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that military training didn't really help with that. One of the last things that I wanted to mention, that I wanted to touch on, that stood out to me in an interview that I saw JD Vance do, I don't remember which interview it was, but he mentioned when he did the debate, it was Vance versus Tim Walz. And Vance made an interesting statement about how he can always tell on his wife's face whether he's done something well or done something poorly. Like, all he has to do is look at his wife and he knows immediately like whether he's done something good or done something bad. So he talked about like walking off the stage after the debate, and the first person he went to was his wife and looked at her face. And he said she just had this look on her face of like, that she was so happy, she was so proud, and like that's when he was like, okay, I know I did a good job. Because he says, because it'll be on her face if I have or if I haven't. Like, I know she'll be honest with me. That is so masculine feminine dynamics right there. And I have a video going into this a little bit more, but that is the feminine oracle. And anytime that anybody is like, what do you bring to the table? What do women bring to the table? That's what women bring to the table. If you have a woman that is connected to her feminine energy and you have a masculine man, and in this case, it does seem like that was their dynamic in that moment. I don't know what it is overall. I don't really know her full connection to her feminine energy, like in general. I don't really think that you can actually get through like Yale Law School without having a connection to your masculine energy. So I'm sure she has access to that for sure. But in this situation, she was embodying the feminine energy and he was embodying the masculine energy. The feminine is like the oracle. I go back to the film 300. King Leonidas literally uses his queen as his oracle in that movie. Like, she's his oracle. She's the one that, like, she's the body, the intuition. He's the mind, the thinking, and she's the body and the intuition. So that connection there is very masculine feminine dynamics, and that's what I want. I want more people, particularly women, to understand that like that's your gift. Like, when men are like, what are you gonna do for me? What do you get? Like, it's not about cooking all his meals, it's not about washing all his socks, it's, are you his oracle? Like, that's the gift that the feminine brings to the masculine. It's being connected enough to her body, her intuition, her women's intuition, which is very strong, like connected to her feminine energy enough, so all it takes is a look and he knows if what he's just done is good or what he's just done is bad. I mean, in that situation, he can't always necessarily like go back and be like, let's redo the debate or something like that, but like that's when he knows if he's on the right path or if he's not on the right path. That is the gift that the feminine brings to the masculine. It's that intuition. It's her being the oracle. Like, is this the right thing? Is it not the right thing? Am I on the right path? Am I not on the right path? If he can tell in her expression, her body language, if he can tell he's not on the right path, it invites him to figure out which path he should go on. She's not necessarily telling him what path to do. So she's not in the masculine leadership role of telling him where to go, but her intuition is informing his direction. That's the gift that the feminine brings to the masculine. The masculine is the one with the direction. He's the one with the leadership. He's the one behind the wheel, but it's the feminine intuition that is the one that guides him. Feminine intuition is so powerful, and I find it really interesting that most men are very intimidated by women's intuition when women are actually more intuitive than them, because women are typically much more intuitive. It's scientifically proven that women have stronger intuition. It's not just like a fake thing. That men tend to be very intimidated, and they don't like when women use their intuition, because I think oftentimes men see that as a shortcoming in them. But at the end of the day, as a man, like if you have a woman who is so connected to her intuition, you can use that. Like you can literally use that to inform you. It's like having a cheat code for life to have a woman that is so connected to her intuition that she can actually like inform you if you're on the right path or if you're not. Unfortunately, for too many men that get stuck in their ego, they don't want to actually accept if a woman is giving them feedback that they're on the wrong direction. They start to get stubborn. They start to be like the stubborn teenager who's like, no, I'm on the right direction. I don't care. I'm going to do it my way, and she can't tell me what to do. Well, she's not telling you what to do, but she's informing you of whether you're going the right way or whether you're not. And she's not telling you what direction to take, but she's giving you an invitation to wake you up that you might be on the wrong path so you can redirect. That is the true gift that the feminine brings to the masculine. It's not about like, you know, birthing all of his babies. It's not about cooking him all of his meals or, you know, serving him or being his peace, because sometimes that's not gonna be peaceful. Like sometimes that's not gonna be a peaceful thing. Like sometimes that's actually gonna be very confronting. And that's the beauty of the masculine feminine dynamic. It's not about being a man's peace. It's actually about being his oracle. And that's if you're in a healthy relationship, obviously. So again, these were just some observations that I had while kind of paying attention to some aspects of the election as it was happening and some of the media stuff. None of this is about politics. I'm not here to get into a debate about politics, so please don't go to the comments and start trying to debate politics or anything like that. It's literally just about the like outward public presentations that we were receiving and my interpretations of them. And based on a little bit of research that I did in the past, I know Donald Trump's a very controversial figure. He was a very prominent member of pop culture for a long time, so knowing about him is not really that controversial, or shouldn't be. Just some observations. I'm honestly like, you can have your opinions about politics all you want. Free country, freedom of speech. I'm big on that. So like if you're not happy with the way things are going, voicing your opinion about that is completely acceptable, whether I agree with you, whether I don't agree with you. Personally, I really wish that it would stick to the politicians. I don't necessarily think that, you know, going after, you know, Usha Vance or going after Melania or Barron or, you know, going after the families who are not actually a part of the policies and things like that. I'm not really on board with that. Like, I think Melania is very chic and stunning, and the fact that she hasn't been on a Vogue cover, I think is like atrocious. Whether you agree with his politics or not, like she should have been on a Vogue cover just herself. That actually does bring me to another interesting topic that I just want to touch on quickly. When you have someone in a relationship, like I don't think relationships can work very well. Maybe they can, but it's tricky if both people really want the spotlight, if both people really want to be the center of attention, because oftentimes you get into competition. Unfortunately, if one person really loves the spotlight and they get involved with somebody who hates the spotlight and does not want to be the center of attention, that can be a conflict too. And I think that that's what's going on a little bit with like the Trump and Melania thing, because a lot of people are saying that they think that she's just utterly miserable, and I don't think that she likes all of the negative attention she's getting, because she's getting attacked. And personally, the attacks that she's getting, that Barron's getting, things like that, I don't think are appropriate. Like, if you don't have the problem with Trump, that's fine, but like I don't really think his family should be dragged into the insults. But I don't think that Melania really likes the attention. I think she very much would like to be more private, which is fine. But that's always going to be a tricky situation when you have one person in the relationship. And this goes for like fame and celebrity. It also goes for like social media. It can just go for like in your own personal community. If you have one person that really wants to be in the spotlight, it's a tricky balance, because if you find someone else who really wants to be in the spotlight, there's usually going to be a conflict, like a competition. If you find someone who really hates the spotlight and needs to be super private, that's going to be a conflict because they're always going to feel like way too exposed. So I think the ideal situation, I mean, unless you have two people who are just kind of neutral about it, but the ideal situation would really be if you do have somebody who wants to be in the spotlight and wants to be a public figure, or, you know, be the center of attention on whatever level, whether it be celebrity or whether it just be in a community or something like that. I think it's usually ideal to have somebody who's like comfortable with being seen and being in the spotlight, but doesn't always want to pull attention. And it does seem like if we're just looking at political figures from this election, it kind of feels like JD Vance and Usha Vance kind of have that. Like, I feel like she seems like she's a little bit nervous to be in the public eye, but she's not uncomfortable with being seen publicly, whereas he's more comfortable with being out there and being public. And I think that that actually is a good example of a balance. Again, everything in their politics, separate situation, but it does seem like that a good dynamic where that can settle in when you have one person, and let's go for the male or the female, wants to be public and in the public eye, and the other person is not like uncomfortable with being seen, but doesn't also need to be, you know, the center of attention and stuff. I think that's probably the ideal scenario, because any other dynamic I think is gonna get a little bit tricky. I mean, unless you have two people that are just sort of like neutral about attention and things like that. But, you know, if you have one person that wants to be very much in the public and you have another person who is sort of more neutral about it, I think that that's probably the best case scenario. Just some things that I observed from just watching election coverage, and I really didn't want to get into talking about the election or anything. This might be controversial or it might get overlooked, but just some observations that I had. So if you have any thoughts on this, please keep it respectful. Not looking to debate policies or politics or anything. This is just about the energetics of relationships, dynamics, and things like that, and some of these public figures. Really not about them. It's really about the lessons we can take and use in our own lives so we can live, you know, happier, healthier lives and have happier, healthier relationships. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment in the comment section below. Please keep it respectful. Any engagement on this channel really does help boost it in the algorithm so more people can get these lessons. If you have any other topics you'd like me to talk about, let me know. I love your suggestions. If you want to check out my guided journals, my courses, masterclasses, details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.